America itself was a mission field.
Historical plaques, chapels, and universities bear witness today to some of our forefathers' original motivation in crossing the Atlantic, to spread the gospel. Initially, American Protestant groups planted churches on the rapidly expanding western frontier. But then, a series of revivals known as the Great Awakening broke out. That led Americans like Adoniram and Nancy Judson to cast their vision overseas.
In the first 12 years of his ministry in Burma, he performed more funerals for family members and for colleagues than he did baptisms for young believers. But today, there are over 5 million believers in that country. Virtually all of them would trace their spiritual lineage to the work of that one man and his wife.
The Judsons and others paved the way for an incredible missions movement which would take Americans around the globe in the late 1800s.
The Civil War was behind, the economy was growing, and so the interest of the country began to turn to other parts of the world.
This missions movement started in 1886 when 200 college students met for a month at Mount Hermon in Massachusetts. Organized by Princeton student Robert Wilder and led by evangelist D.L. Moody, the conference encouraged students to evangelize the world in their generation. 2 years later, Wilder and John Mott, one of the Mount Hermon students, formed the Student Volunteer Movement. From modest beginnings, it would become one of the all-time great mission recruitment vehicles.
Within 5 years, there were 6,000 young people who had volunteered to go into the mission fields.
Over the next 50 years, that force grew to 20,000. These students came from the finest schools like Princeton, Dartmouth, and Yale, and their mission was nothing short of extraordinary: reach the world for Christ by the year 1900.
These young people were so idealistic. They felt so called of God. They felt such an anointing and were willing to sacrifice everything.
For many, that meant a one-way ticket and literally packing their belongings in a coffin, knowing they might never return. Today, their impact is still felt in so many countries, like Korea. Less than 2% of the people there were Christian when Henry Appenzeller, a Methodist, and Horace Underwood, a Presbyterian, reached the country.
Today, there are probably 2 million Methodists in South Korea and maybe up to 5 million Presbyterians from these two very young college students.
In 1910, movement leader John Mott worked with more than 1,000 missionaries on plans for worldwide evangelism. But those plans were cut short by World War I and a post-war distrust of Western culture and American missionaries. Who could have guessed that the Second World War would actually pave the way for another missions miracle? During the 1940s and World War II, millions of American GIs served across the world in Europe, North Africa, and Asia. Most were seeing the world for the first time, and many returned home with a new heart for missions.
The American economy was growing. People had the opportunity to go to college like never before because of the GI Bill. And you had hundreds of thousands of people who had been given a vision for the world. And then you had a few key people.
People like Bill Bright, who founded Campus Crusade for Christ at UCLA in 1951. Since then, Campus Crusade has exposed millions to the gospel and led thousands of students to Christ. In 1953, Bob Pierce began World Vision to help Korean war orphans. Today, World Vision helps 70 million people a year in its quest to end poverty and transform lives. What we know today as the Urbana Missions Conference also started after the war. Since 1946, it has challenged more than 200,000 young people to commit to missions, and they have.
In a short time, from the United States after World War II, you would have over 100,000 missionaries of all denominations all over the earth.
Today, mission leaders are looking to students again as the new face of missions. There's even a student volunteer movement, too, that they say may indeed make the history books and bring even more people into the kingdom of heaven. Heather Sells, CBN News.